Our topic for the podcast today is 10 marketing tips for emerging and established franchise brands. And our guest is David Chapman, President and CEO of 919 Marketing.
Welcome, I'm Ryan Hicks, and this is Modern Business, the podcast to learn from franchise business leaders and explore new business technology. Our community is about sharing knowledge and tools that help us achieve our goals in business and beyond. Thanks for being here and welcome to Modern Business.
All right, folks, before we jump to the top 10 marketing tips, I'll note that David was actually on vacation whenever we recorded the podcast. He's a very busy guy. He's very gracious to catch up with us while he's on vacation. He was in a bit of a remote area, so portions at the beginning there were kind of cutting in and out. So what I'm going to do is edit out the first tip, and this will give us a nice little opportunity. I'll tell you what the first tip is. So tip number one is develop the marketing roadmap. And this is an absolute critical component to the 10 marketing tips because all of the others kind of build on it. And what I'm going to do is just leave it at that and link in the show notes to where you can go get a summary of the tip number one, which is develop the marketing roadmap. You're definitely going to want to go check that out. And then what we're going to do is cut over to tip number two, which we start with here in the recording. And the recording picks back up and it's not cutting in and out. So I think we're going to be good to go there. Be sure to check out the link for tip number one in the show notes. I hope you find value in it. I hope you enjoy it. Leave us comments and reviews if you find value in the podcast. Towards the end, we get into all types of topics that I think you're going to find entertaining and informative. And so be sure you listen through the end. This is another really great podcast. Cheers and enjoy. Here's 10 marketing tips with David Chapman, picking up with tip number two. So tip number two is move from I think to I know. And share why is that important and what should be done about that.
Yeah, it sort of is the sister to tip one of marketing roadmap of, if you're going to go out and spend a lot of money, put a lot of resources behind trying to grow your business. I mean, I can tell you numerous times, as I mentioned earlier, I've been in the business for a long time, and I've had a couple of really strong sort of gut feelings about certain strategies, and clients have as well. I'll tell you a story about that in a second about how we almost completely blew $1 million for one of our clients. But there's a lot of places where you can find this data to move from I think to I know. I mean, if you look at in some instances, if you're a retail company, if you're a consumer company, you can look at credit card purchases and work with Experian and other folks that are in the industry. That will absolutely give you, a really detailed profile of each one of your customers. So you move from you think you know who your customers are to you really know who they are because you can look at their credit card purchases and get, as we all know, the amount of data they have on all of us based on our credit card purchases is pretty scary and pretty cool at the same time. And certainly that's one way of doing it. I mean, if you want to look at a very basic kind of way, I mean, if you're looking for franchise sales, for example, to do research of your franchisees and do online survey and incent them to respond and have a really smart survey where you find out that information about them based on just your own research. So that's not going to break the bank clearly. And if you're a small brand and you don't have that many franchises, I mean, you can go to list houses and you can buy competitive brand franchisees information, their name, their contact information, email, etc. And then, you can then do some analytics based on those folks. So if you're a young brand, you can still get some pretty good data to move from I think to I know. And certainly those are just a few of the tools I'm talking about. But getting back to how we almost blew $1 million one time, we were working with an in-home care company. I won't mention their name. And we were going to run a $1 million ad campaign, and we were doing focus groups around an idea positioning strategy that the client loved, we loved. We thought it was just absolutely killer. And the idea was that blank. We treat we treat your dad just like family, or we treat you just like family. Getting into the fact that if your mom or dad is in Topeka and you're in California, you want somebody that's going to treat them like family. So we go to focus groups and we get blasted in every focus group, and we hear things that you don't expect to hear, like my brother's a crack addict and all he does is go to my mom's house and never mows her yard and takes her money and eats her food. Or
Right.
I'm in a lawsuit with my sister right now over my parents' inheritance, or all these things that we never ever considered. And just that one always sticks in my brain, because whenever we're working off I think, it reminds me of we need to move to I know.
Yeah. And it's a dangerous proposition to be out there spending real dollars and not actually focus on what you know. And that's a very key lesson there. On tip number 3, focus on the right target audience. It's very similar to that. It's just now you're getting more focus. And smart marketers develop personas to focus their messaging and their materials on their target audience. So talk about how you look at developing these buyer personas, and maybe share a few different ways or a few different types of content that should be catered to different personas and different target audiences.
Right. Yeah, I think most people in franchising know sort of what the different profiles might be. I mean, from millennials to the disenchanted corporate folks who want to do something they love, to the older ones who get laid off, to this new one I've read about this weekend, which I thought was really interesting, which is the unretirees, people who retire and get bored and come back, and I see that increasingly in franchise brands we work with. I mean, and then if you want to cut it even deeper than that, I mean, you go male, female, you go ethnicity, you go backgrounds, work backgrounds. There's a lot of ways of sort of looking at, who are our, and typically we like to cut it down to 3 to 5 profiles. And you do that by looking at your current franchisees, not necessarily if you want to weed out the ones that are sort of the ones that are the problem childs who are underperforming, then maybe you take your best franchisees and you do, again, surveys to find out sort of, to get more information on them, to be able to really start working on these personas. And we literally do personas where we come up with a real person, or what looks to be a real person, an actual picture. Mm-hmm. And then we write a narrative about who they are, what their media habits are, where they get information from, what their pain points are. I mean, go very detailed, very deep on that. So whenever we are creating content and going after one or more of those personas, then we're not just sort of, we look at it really deeply in terms of not only what kind of content would be for each one of those personas, but also what platform. Different content for different platforms. You can't have one set of content that's going to work across all platforms, obviously. So, it's again, these sort of stagger from our very first tip to all the way down to here. They all sort of work together and sort of build on themselves. And certainly, this is a critical part of our LinkedIn, our link program, is being able to really get detailed on our personas, and that's part of our link planning.
I really like that. That's a good tip, and it sounds so easy and so simple, but actually picturing someone and picturing this person that you've crafted a narrative of, it helps throughout the organization as you're executing on the content creation, whether it's the internal team or you collaborate, your organization collaborating with your clients. That's a really good tip, is create that narrative and literally a picture and a character of the different personas. Yeah. That's good stuff.
Yeah, in our war rooms, when we're working on stuff, those folks are actually living there with us every day. They're on the wall. We have them actually taped on walls, and when different teams come in, they bring their personas and we talk. So, love it.
So the 4th tip is around brand development, and these definitely build on each other. So how do you lead your clients down the process of actually defining their and developing their brand stories? Is it building upon these personas?
Yeah, all these sort of stack on top of each other. All these sort of build on top of the other. So certainly this is the part, and I'll tell you, it's brand development is something that I think is probably the weakest link in franchising right now, in my opinion. Is that the reason being is that obviously if you have the brand calibrated the right way, it can definitely drive market share, but also to CEOs out there and investors out there, it's proven that the right brand development can drive stock values as well. So, how do you do it? It's certainly, it's easier said than done, clearly. And Branding can be quite painful. Just to ask cattle out there. It's certainly not something that's easily done, but if you do it right, you can you can really make some things happen. I mean, and again, I'll not to shamelessly promote this, but I mean, we do have another thing on our website for the Rosetta Stone, again, for brand development, where we help them reposition their brand. Back when they were a $12 million privately held company by two Mennonite brothers in Northern Virginia. Now they're a publicly traded company, as you know. But again, it goes down to positioning. It's got to be backed by intelligence. Again, don't go positioning your brand based on what you think, because you're going to be wrong. 9 times out of 10, you've got to really get in there and figure out what's a compelling, ownable, and sustainable positioning strategy that incorporates both the competitive set and the buyer perceptions and needs, all that rolled in one to figure out this white space again, which we like to call it, which is where it's ownable, compelling, and sustainable, and it's ownable. It's got to be ownable to you, or it's not a positioning that works for you. You got to find something that you stand for, no one else stands for, that's compelling to people. And if you can do that, then you've got a winner. There are very few brands out there, in my opinion, that do it well, but the ones that do pull it off and are able to stick with it, that's another part of it. I mean, I see a lot of brands where they get sick of their own marketing faster than consumers do. I think that's a wear out factor there that I think is a mistake. Sometimes people just need to just pound it at home until, people really get it and sort of, look at Aflac. I mean, they've been pushing out that, that stupid duck or whatever it is for years. It worked. Everybody knows Aflac, right? So, you've got to be able to really stick with it once you've got something that's compelling and ownable and sustainable like that. So that's really the way we sort of see brand development. And again, in terms of the process, obviously that would take a lot more time than our conversation today. But if everyone would go to our website, look under our brand development, and there's a case study you can download.
Yeah, it was actually after, I think you and I chatted probably 2 weeks ago, and right after we chatted, I got onto a call with a major national brand there in 2,000 markets or beyond. I was on with their CEO, and we got into a fascinating conversation. I think it was spurred by a question that you made me think of, so I asked it to the CEO, and it was his response was interesting, because as they kind of got into their war room, they started digging deeper into what they were doing and what they were pushing out, and they realized that they were kind of getting away from their core message. And what they're finding massive success with now is really reconnecting with what they were about when they were founded in the 1960s. So they're reconnecting with that, repackaging it for the different personas, but it's a really, really powerful thing. And so,
yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, Harley's a classic example of that. When you've got a legacy brand that got tired, but the essence of what the brand's all about is still just as compelling, or maybe even more so in today's world. You just have to sort of figure out how to connect the dots there.
Yeah, and also kudos, by the way, on the Rosetta Stone success story. That's a really, really nice one, and I don't want your comment that you threw in there to go unheard with branding can hurt. Just ask cattle.
No doubt.
I enjoy that. So what does fewer, bigger, better mean? Which is tip number 5. What is fewer, bigger, better?
Yeah, that's, again, we all sort of go through our business lives, and I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I can remember, scores of basketball games from 10 years ago, or little catchphrases that people that I've worked with have. And this is one that I used to work with Nabisco, and this was this older Georgia gentleman, salt of the earth guy. And that was always his mantra, was fewer, bigger, better, fewer, bigger, better. And it stuck with me, and it's really super powerful if you think about it. You think about how many places you could spend money, from a paid, from a earned or PR perspective, from if you look at all the ways you could spend money, there's probably 60 ways, I don't know, I'm making it up, maybe more than that, where you could spend your money. So you need to figure out what channels are going to pay out the most for you, and what kind of content is going to be most effective within those channels. And if you can do that, then certainly you've got a huge leg up on your competition, because no one has unlimited budgets, everyone's got to figure out how to spend their money to get the biggest impact. And that's really where, when we develop programs, and again, going back to our very tip one of developing a content marketing program, you've got to think about it in that regard. We can't create 50 pieces of content and run it on 60 different channels. It's just not going to work. So you've got to really sort of hone in on that. And, that's why it gets down to, if you look at, HubSpot, for example, we're on HubSpot, and certainly, whatever CRM tool you're on. But I know the research that I've seen from HubSpot suggests that, the 3 most read pieces of content overall, again, this doesn't apply to every brand clearly, but, video, articles, i.e. news, and social content are the 3 places that people seem to read the most thoroughly online, that pay attention to the most, and are looking for more, in the future, more video, more articles, that kind of stuff. So, you have to decide for your own brand, as part of the overall marketing mix, what your fewer, bigger, better is, and that all comes out when you do the right content marketing plan up front. But it certainly guides your thinking, and it's a very simple statement, but it's certainly a very powerful statement.
Extremely powerful. And there's a couple of things that you said in that little exchange there that are quite interesting. If you look at how people are finding their news and their information, it's radically different. And in one of your presentations that I think I've seen, it said even 2 years ago, think about how the ways that you find your news, you find your information, it's so different. And all this is changing. How are some of the ways, the answers are obvious, but how are some of the ways that these are changing, and how are you thinking about, you mentioned news. I've seen you guys are doing some interesting work with the news outlet and the news channel and the news play. How are you thinking about all that?
Yeah, and again, not to beat a dead horse, but it certainly goes back to your strategy. It's not today's world. It's less about let's just go out there and pepper every media outlet there is, and just hope we get some, and we bring them in, and we've got some impressions. That's it's a good day's work. It just doesn't work that way anymore. You've got to be more strategic in terms of what media you go after, and then what kind of, because there's a few different ways you can get media coverage. One is to push a story out, where you've got a story, you want to tell it, and you want the media to cover it. That'll happen sometimes, but it's really about newsjacking or writing the news current is probably the best way of doing it, because that's what people are looking for. And so, if it's a seasonal time, or if it's just something that just happened, for example, with the flu, we have a client of ours that's in the largest urgent care franchise in the country. And, we had them on CBS News, Evening News, about 2 weeks ago. And why did they get on there? It wasn't because, they're such a great company. They don't want to talk about brands. The news doesn't want to talk about brands. They want to talk about things that help their viewers, obviously, or their readers or listeners. So, we were able to get them on there just because of the fact that we had a compelling pitch about that. So in terms of how people might see that CBS News story, there's obviously a lot of people that watched it live, but the repurposing of that and where it ends up showing up in terms of news feeds all over the internet, and sort of how we use it in social channels even. So, we really use it as a piece of content as well, not just sort of letting it sit there as, wow, that was great, we want CBS News the other day. It's how do we use that on our website? How do we use it in our social channels? How do we use it in the new business, from a franchise sales perspective? How do we use that to create validation for our brand right when we're talking to a prospect who may be looking at us and someone else? It certainly gives you a boost there. And so you look to repurpose it and use it and squeeze every ounce of good out of it that you can in today's world.
Good stuff. Tip number 6 relates to brand relevance. How are some of the ways that you are defining and looking at brand relevance?
Well, I said earlier that one of our other tips was sort of the weakest link in franchising. I think I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to say this one is probably the weakest, and that is, I do think people are getting a little bit better at this, but I see this particularly with franchise salespeople, where they want to just bludgeon you to death with how great the brand is. Let me tell you about how great this brand is, how much money you can make. Let me tell you about all this stuff, versus, when they go home and sit down in front of the TV or they look on their computer, they completely change their mindset when they become a consumer, and it changes. I'll give you a perfect example of that. Is that LinkedIn? If you look at LinkedIn all the time, my information might be slightly old at this point in time, but last time I looked at it, if you look at LinkedIn, you look at what's being read and shared and consumed the most on LinkedIn. The two top topics were something along the lines of, I think it's how salespeople stay calm is the number one read piece of content on LinkedIn of all time, and number two was something around toxic behaviors that might push people away. So that's what people are reading the most is content that's about them. It's not about the brand. So let me tell you what I mean even further. So if you push back a little bit further and you look at the authors of those two pieces of content, they both are book writers. So they're out there pushing their book and they're selling it, but they're not saying, "Hey, check out my book. It's on Amazon," or "Check out my book. It's a New York Times bestseller." They are giving away pieces of content that are consumer centric, not brand centric. And that's the part of this where brand relevance really sort of creeps into franchise sales, is that the more you can become a trusted expert, the more you can give them content that 5 years ago you'd have never ever considered. Maybe even doing something crazy like my brand versus my biggest competitor. How do you make the right decision, or why my brand may not be right for you? Those kind of pieces of content are more relevant and turn you into a trusted expert because, if you, again, I'll sort of quote HubSpot again. What they say is that up to 70% of the buying decision is made before they ever contact the salesperson. So you think about the power of that statement and how that relates to your website. What kind of content do you have on your website that's going to turn you into a trusted expert versus somebody who bounces and never comes back? So if you think about how many people you're talking to, and just figure at least 2 incidents, people may have been on your website and didn't come back or didn't call you. So that really speaks to brand relevance and franchising, I think, in a pretty big way.
That's very powerful, and it makes me think of some of the articles that I've read of yours on Forbes. I think it was the one about what your franchisees really think about you, and then you wrote one on the flip side. What was the title? Was it "Think About You" or what they hate about you?
And one of them was "Why Your Franchisees Hate You," and the other is "Why Your Franchisees Hate You." So, sort of talking it from both sides. I mean, because we're sort of in the middle. Most of our franchise brands, where we're talking to franchisees all the time, and we're talking to the franchisor all the time. There's always friction. It's sort of like family, right? I mean, when you go to Thanksgiving, you sit down at the table, and your brother-in-law is there, and your sister's there, and you guys always have friction, or maybe you have friction with your parents. It's just family, and family has friction. And so we're in this position of being able to sort of maybe diffuse the situation by really talking about it in honest ways what franchisees have issues about with their franchisors, and conversely, what franchisors wish franchisees did a better job of. So that was sort of behind those two articles.
Got it. We'll link to those as well. And then the last point that I'll note on brand relevance, tip number 6 here, is I can really picture how having those personas up in the war room and having that narrative will really help drill down on this point. Is what is relevant? What do these folks care about? They don't care about your brand at the end of the day.
Yeah. When you look at this picture and you read their profile, it's more conversational. It's more about what can I do to help you make a better decision.
Yes, agreed. Tip number 7 is brand validation. So let's just quickly look at how does third-party validation help enable franchise brands, and maybe share a couple of examples.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if you think about, I'll start with an emerging brand, which is what we're talking about today. If you're an emerging brand, you could have 5, you could have 100, whatever you want to classify as sort of emerging. But, and I'm looking at a franchise brand, and I'm someone who's one of those personas we talked about earlier, either unretired or millennial or corporate action, whatever the case may be. Looking at making a big life change decision here that's going to fundamentally change my life. And if I'm looking at a brand, I want to feel like I'm making the right decision. I want to feel like someone else thinks they're important and vibrant and relevant. And third-party content, i.e., being covered by news, certainly does that. It's a cost-effective way. It's again, the content value of it lives and breathes long beyond when it ran or when it was viewed or listened to. And the stories that are there to be told are endless. Most franchise brands don't really think about it that way, but I mean, we do a ton of CEO branding. We'll brand the CEO. We'll make sure that he or she is really a rock star on social media. We'll make sure that they are a contributing writer at some place that's important to franchisees, potential franchisees. We do a ton of stories on franchisees themselves because franchisees, come from some really interesting backgrounds. They have some real personal, emotional stories. And if you can tell those stories, then they're more relatable. And you look at like a franchise brand, you're not only looking at the brand, you're looking at the people you're going to be sort of peers with. And if you can relate to those people and like those people and say, yeah, that's my story too, I get it, I really want to be a part of this brand, it has a huge impact. And that's really what third-party content can do for you.
Big time, and agreed. By the way, I'm slightly losing you in and out. I don't know that there's anything that we can do about it, but keep plowing ahead. But
sure.
Tip number 8: proactively manage the brand. What are some ways to go about this?
This really sort of weighs heavily on one of the brands we were talking about before we got on today. This really talks about the fact that if you are corporate and you don't have a strategy in place, you haven't mapped it all out, you're not aggressively pushing out what marketing is going to happen, and if you don't do it, your Zs are going to, particularly the ones who've been there the longest are the ones that are most successful, oddly enough. And the last thing you want is for your franchisees to be managing your brand, meaning that specifically from a marketing perspective, I'm talking about where they're creating advertising on their own. When there is no social media strategy, where they are all just sort of going off the ranch and doing whatever they think is right. And even worse, it might be working for them. So God knows what happens to you when you try to take it back, because they're going to go like, well, what are you talking about? And whether it's on brand strategy or not is another topic, but, whether you're 5 locations, 5,000 locations, you need to proactively manage your brand, and you need to use research to do it, where you don't just go out and say, here's our new ad campaign, here's our new assets for social media, here's our new website, here's our new e-marketing, text marketing, whatever the case may be. You need to go there with some evidence, going from I think to I know, which we talked about in one of the earlier tips. You can't go there and say, I think this is going to work. You've got to say, I know it's going to work, and here's why. And that's part of proactively managing your brand.
Yeah. I have some funny stories that I could share on this topic when it comes to having folks out there in typically larger systems, and they have folks out there cranking out content across their social platforms, because I'm with a Rallyo social technology platform, and we see some wild stuff, like stuff that would just make you cringe. And then also sometimes you see great stuff that other folks should be leveraging and sharing as well. But it's really just about defining that strategy, knowing those personas and staying on message, and really just brand standards and adhering to them.
Exactly.
Number 9, content marketing. This is, I think, kind of the meat and potatoes of actually executing and delivering on all the research that the different research and thought and strategic thinking and all the rest of all the other tips. It's about actually delivering this content. And you mentioned fewer, bigger, better, which is focusing your content on a few different channels and not putting it everywhere, shotgun approach. But it's a noisy world out there. So what should brands be thinking about whenever they're executing this and around really the right content mix?
Yeah. Well, I mean, content marketing is very easy. All you got to do is have the right message at the right time for the right buyer at the right channel. I mean, that's pretty hard, Yeah. But if you can nail that, you've got something, again, that's, and again, to do that, it all starts with all these steps we just talked about. Developing the right message, again, it's got to be based on research based. I mean, we have a we have a tool. Not to get into a long-winded explanation of it, but I went to a show about 2 years ago, and I ran across a guy who had started a company, and I love the technology because the technology allows you to understand what content is bringing someone to your website, what content's actually being read, and then the most important part of all is, what content is actually driving engagement, i.e. leads, people clicking, people asking for information, and then being able to look at your competitors and be able to find out what's working for them. If you've got that way you've got something that the content is working because you're measuring. It's not just based on what you think is great, because until that tool, until this tool, we call it 919 Insights. We have exclusively for franchising industry. Until then, I will just be dead honest with you. When we were working on social channels, social content for our clients, we were guessing. Let's be honest. Everyone is. You can base it on, okay, well, if you look at SEO, you can see what content's being clicked on the most, but that doesn't tell you what content's really driving people to your website specifically, or it definitely doesn't tell you what content they're reading. We ran it on ourselves first, and when I ran it on ourselves, I was absolutely shocked at how little content on our website was being read because we had too much, and it was too hard to find it. And so, if you can get the right message, the right time, the right buyer and the right channel, again, meaning right channel, meaning content on social and content on a website, and even between social channels, it should be different. And that's part of the content marketing mix that you were talking about. And again, it's something that I think is really rolling back on some things we've talked about. It goes right back to brand relevance. If you do content marketing well, then you're going to be relevant. People are going to trust your content. They're going to trust you as a company, and they're going to be more likely to do business with you as a result of it.
Isn't it a funny thing? Even whenever you ask, let's say this is on the franchise development side, and you ask a prospective franchisee that becomes a franchisee of your system, same thing on the customer side. You ask that customer why they made this purchase decision. Oftentimes they might reference something, but it's actually not, but they really actually read some article first or saw some video first that was top of mind, and then they just took the action on another little thing. Oftentimes the point is that people will even misrecollect how they found the brand. And so being able to quantifiably show how folks are coming to you and what content's actually working is an extremely powerful thing.
Well, and what we found out running it on ourselves first, obviously we want to eat our own dog food first, is that the content that brings someone to your site is rarely the content that drives them to engagement, which is an interesting thing to think about. So if you know that, then you've got some powerful, you've got a powerful advantage over your competition, because you know exactly what content you need to have on your website. Going back to that 70% are not going to contact you until 70% of the buying decision is made. So if you think about that on top of knowing what content's actually driving engagement, then you definitely got a big leg up.
It's powerful stuff. The last tip, tip number 10, is measure and refine. So you mentioned obviously measuring on the insights, the 919 Insights side. Are there any other tools that you would point to help measure marketing efforts? Obviously, this is a very important component, critical component of the link plan that you mentioned. But are there any tools or tips to measure marketing efforts?
Well, I think you know a pretty good one, right?
Oh, I know a few very good ones.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'll just keep it high level because I'm not going to get anybody mad at me. But CRM, a CRM tool is obviously essential. From an inbound marketing perspective, to be able to weave a CRM into your web and social, and be able to measure from an inbound perspective what's going on, and being able to score leads and be able to see what your conversion is, all this stuff. CRM is an absolute critical part of it. Web analytics certainly are a critical part of it, which we certainly with our Insights program we're able to do from a social perspective. To be able to, again, it's sort of going from this sort of like, I'm going to push all this stuff out and sort of like spitball it and throw it on the wall and see what works. Now, today's world, you can get a lot more analytical than that and be able to really sort of get a a much better understanding of where you stand. And I will be honest with you, it's scary sometimes, because when you peel back the curtain and you look and see how you're actually doing, it's a tough thing to walk into your boss's, office and go like, "Hey, look, we suck. We got to get better." But if you can say how we're going to get better, then certainly that's the first step to recovery, so to speak.
That reminds me of it was probably 10 years ago, but I read this poem. I forget who it's by. I should find it and link to it. But it's basically the man in the glass, the man in the mirror, and having that reflection and recollection is sometimes tough, but it's super important. But one other point that I'd like to note, and the brilliance of these 10 tips that kind of all build on each other, is whenever you're doing fewer, bigger, better, it makes measuring and refining a lot simpler, because it can get there's so much data out there. It's mind-boggling, and it's tough to even decipher what you should be looking at. But whenever you are fewer, bigger, better, measuring this becomes a lot more simple.
Absolutely right. That's a great point.
Yeah. So those are the 10 tips. Any last words of thoughts on those 10 tips? And I have one other topic I'd like to poach, but any last thoughts?
Well, hopefully, folks that are listening sort of see how these build on top of each other, and, to be able to, 10 tips doesn't sound like much, but certainly, it takes a lot of work up front. I'll just go ahead and tell you that if you're not willing to put in the time up front to really build a plan based on market intelligence, then it's, you're probably going to have, I'll tell you the other thing I will say that I haven't said so far is that this industry is a copycat industry. You see it, I see it, where people, if someone's doing better than you, you just copy what they're doing. So what that ends up being is that everybody's doing pretty average work. If everybody's using the same tools, the same content, all that stuff, then it's pretty much going to be a copycat Me Too average result. So being able to build your own program from the ground up based on real data and real research and real real feedback, allows you to build your own and sort of maybe ties into the next topic we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I would like to give you guys some kudos. I've seen you execute very well. For example, Beef Jerky Outlet's a group that I know well. And I was actually working with them for probably 2.5 years before I didn't know that you guys were doing work with them, but they've done very well, and I think it's a testament to a lot of the stuff that you've helped in collaboration with them. They've got a great brand, but
correct.
I think you guys have done a very good job. So and by the way, your website is 919marketing.com. How do folks find more information on you?
Yeah, definitely just go to 919marketing.com. And again, some of the downloads, the branding download, the link planning download are there. You can find them very easily. And if not, just you can give me a call on my office line at 919-459-8156 or D Chapman, DCHAPMAN at 919marketing.com.
Beautiful. The last topic, I think, before we jumped on here, we were chatting about a few different things. And one of them, we were talking about, for example, Red Bull is doing some really exciting and different things when it comes to creating different channels of communication. And then we also poached some kind of outside of the box ideas. For example, there was a bank that you mentioned that was doing some work that maybe could spur some ideas for different brands out there when it comes to just some of the work that they're doing. Let's chat on and riff back and forth on a couple of these different ideas.
Sure, absolutely. Well, sort of like the two other topics we just discussed, which are why your franchisees hate you and why the franchisor hates you. This is a kind of a controversial topic in some ways. This is something that I talked about at the recent IFA show. And it was about owning versus running your franchise development sales channels. Mm-hmm. And it sort of goes to the fact that if you look at... That was a good panel, by the way. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. But so if you think about sort of the ways that sales channels are created today, you've got earned media, which we talked about earlier. You got your social channels. You got your content on your social channels. You've got your lead forms and things on those. You got your broker networks. You got digital. You got traditional. You got all these places, but you really don't own any of those. You only rent them. For example, I'll just say something crazy. What if the broker networks, instead of the way they are today, what if someone rolled them up, just say a VC firm rolled them up into one big or one big one versus then there's only about two or three smaller ones? That would fundamentally change the landscape of how people are driving, leads, driving franchise sales. If you think about that could happen. Yeah. I mean, social channels, I've heard them. Look at Facebook's issues right now, and I've heard rumors that Google at some point in time is going to start charging you more if leads that they drive to you actually convert. They'll be able to sort of prove that they converted. So you definitely don't own the content on there, and you don't own sort of the future of that. And my point of that and that topic at the IFA show was you need to start using all those channels, but very quickly pull them to your own database to where you create your own channel, and to your reference with Red Bull. Red Bull, obviously everybody knows the sports energy drink or the I guess not energy drink. Yeah, energy drink. But they created their own magazine called the Red Bulletin, which is bigger than, things like Rolling Stone and big magazines. It's a global magazine where they created their own media channel where they don't have to, use other channels. They've got their own. People are using their channel now. And, they also have a music channel that's an online channel for like new musicians. They have, they actually sell content that they create. They create some really amazing videography stuff with some really, high energy folks going down mountains and doing extreme skiing and things like that. They sell their content to the media themselves. So, there's sort of a flagstone for that. And then the bank you're talking about, again, I can't remember the name of the bank, but it's a European bank where they created their own channel, their own TV channel, talking about being financially smart and helping people get smarter with their money. And if, someone helps me get smarter with my money and it's really engaging like that, where am I going to bank? I'm going to bank there. I guess I encourage people in franchising to maybe think out of the box like that. And if there's a way you can create your own channel like that where you can own it, then think about it. You don't have to worry about your competitors. You don't have to worry about whether somebody's going to charge you more. If you think about this is one I said I just popped in my head. But if you think about if you've got 5,000 names in your database, which I think almost all brands have at least 5,000 names in their database. If you figure it costs you $50 to get that name, which I think is conservative, 50,
Yep.
What's that? That's like
$250,000,
something like that. You've got, but you've already spent. So you think about the value of that, and the more names you get, and think how valuable that could be, where you could actually, use that and monetize it, launch new brands through it. You could actually sell access to that list to non-competitive or complementary brands. There's a lot of really cool things you could do.
That's interesting. On this thread, and maybe I'm getting too macro here. I like to get macro and micro. But if you look at just how the channels of distribution used to be owned or used to run, and today, there's a concept that I would call disintermediation, which is the removal of the middleman. If you look at, and this is probably getting way extrapolated, but if you look at blockchain technology, I think at the end of the day, it's really getting rid of the quote unquote middleman, and it's just more of a focus on direct to consumer. You look at a lot of the businesses that are doing very, very well, they're building that direct to consumer and the ownership of that relationship. So like when you're saying capture the information and get it to your own database as quickly as possible, find your own voice and find creative ways to build community and engagement. There's more avenues to do that now than there ever have been. And it's a quite interesting trend. Even Donald Trump is the epitome of going direct to his consumers, aka Twitter, right? So that's just a very interesting topic in general.
Amazon certainly is. Amazon is spending millions and millions of dollars on content. Same as Apple. They're creating their own content, music, movies, all those things.
Yep. We are in works for a modern business TV episode series where, as I travel a lot, I think I've mentioned this to you.
Yeah.
Where I'm literally going to have a film crew and we're going to be doing on-site. We're going to be doing the podcast on site, and then a lot of other stuff kind of behind the scenes. And we're launching it on Amazon, the Amazon video platform, and then getting it published over on iTunes. So literally, back in the day, you used to have a publishing house and you used to have a
ridiculous budget behind you to do all these things. Well, people can self-publish this now, and especially brands. So there's just a lot of, and this stuff is changing by the day. If you look, like for example, Roku just not just, but a little while back there, they signed a direct deal with Hitachi, which isn't the biggest, TV manufacturer in the world, but all the Hitachi TVs are coming with Roku, or already are coming with Roku built in, and they're very developer centric, to where you could literally launch your own channel and have instant distribution. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, this is not some stuff way out in the future. It's happening right now.
Yep. Lastly, I forgot what you said. It reminded me of you mentioned Facebook and some of their woes. The point is it doesn't necessarily matter the platform. It's more about how you capture that information, get it over into your own database. But did you see Snapchat? Yesterday was April Fool's Day. Snapchat. Did you see the dig they took at Facebook? They put a filter to give us with the whole Russian stuff. I thought that was hilarious.
They've got their own problems themselves, though. So
they have some big issues, actually. Well, anyways, we could probably riff back and forth on a bunch of stuff, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We talked about the top 10 tips, marketing tips for both emerging and established brands, and then we got into some other topics here. Are there any final parting words of wisdom or advice for folks that are listening?
The only thing is that certainly I think we covered a lot of ground here, and certainly all of it is critically important, including the last thing we just talked about, which is get out of your own shell and sort of looking for a breakthrough idea, that something you maybe never even considered. And if you're the one that does it and comes out with it, again, like a bank. I mean, Wells Fargo, many of the big banks could have come up with that idea. They didn't. So. Yep. You don't have to be the largest brand to have the best idea. And if you can come up with a really interesting idea that's breakthrough like that, it could really change your brand.
David Chapman, President and CEO of 919 Marketing, thank you very much for your time.
I enjoyed it very much, man. Hope to see you soon.
Cheers.